So last week's discussion, we talked a lot about sincerity and also to a degree some self-responsibility to develop sincerity, didn't we? Like what's involved with that. And you can see from our discussion last week that if we don't know where we're at in our progression, it's very easy to be completely insincere while at the same time believing yourself to be quite sincere. It's a very interesting thing, sincerity, when it's measured from God's perspective rather than our own. God's laws have much higher standards for our sincerity than we have for ourselves. And that is where most people struggle to receive God's love, because they are working by their own standards rather than by God's standards. And also, for the most part, not even interested in finding out what God's standards actually are. Because God's standards are going to be based on laws, and those laws are going to be consistent and definite, and they're not going to be malleable, and they're not going to change. So for many of us, the way we view as a relationship, as we discussed a little last week, we sort of view a relationship like a series of compromises. You know, I compromise on this and you compromise on that, and then we can have a relationship. But obviously from God's perspective, he wants a relationship, but he wants it to be real as he defines what real is. And that is very different to what we define a real relationship is. And this is where, for the majority of us, this is where our prayer has problems. Because our prayer is frequently, we're thinking we're being sincere, but often we're just acting in an addiction, or more commonly, being sincere in our tantrum. We're just having a tantrum, and we're expressing the tantrum to God, but actually, and we're quite sincere in our tantrum in the fact that we believe that our tantrum is justified, just like a little child who didn't get a lolly in the store believes his tantrum is justified. But obviously not being completely sincere about why we are responding the way we are. And this is something that if we don't address, then our relationship with God is not going to grow. So I wondered whether you guys had any questions about last week's discussion based upon what you heard last week. Did any of you listen to it again? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And whether you had any questions about the discussion in terms of about developing sincerity. How do you do that when you already believe yourself to be sincere in particular? How do you go about developing sincerity as God would measure it rather than how we would measure it? Is the real question. So if any of you have any questions about that, I'd like to answer them now, and then we can proceed with the developing discussion a bit further. Ronnie?
A thought popped up this week for me about, because I know on certain subjects, pretty much on every subject I'm sincere, but is it a matter of each thing that comes up for you, you've got to work through that process of being sincere? Or is it, is there an overall thing where you can work on your faith as an overall kind of blanket thing, or is it literally to every subject that you've got to work through your fear and your faith, humility?
Well, it's a good question. You were basically saying, is there a global thing we can do to overcome our sort of lack of sincerity? Or is our sincerity more to do with each individual thing we might have to address? Right. So that's a good question. During our childhoods, the majority of us have been taught, and actually taught very rigidly, to become insincere in our dealings with others. Now, you can see in the way children are brought up, for the most part, insincerity is often encouraged. And we gave an example of that last week, remember, of where a child is asked to say sorry, and as long as the parent just hears sorry from the child, they're not measuring the child's sincerity about whether they're really sorry or not. They're just saying, just say sorry. because they want the illusion of their child being sorry, but they don't really care about the substance of the child actually feeling sorry. And then once the child is rewarded for that behaviour, which most children are, by the time the child's become an adult, it now feels that it can give the illusion of a feeling rather than the feeling, the real feeling, and other people should accept the illusion rather than saying, actually, you're not being truthful now. Right? So by the time we're adults, we are expecting to be able to give an illusion to the people around us, and we're expecting that they accept it. And we're expecting that if they don't accept it, that they're the bad person. Right? If they don't accept our illusion, we feel that they're being, inconsiderate or unkind by not accepting the illusion that we are portraying. And it can get so bad that we actually have lived the illusion for so long that we actually think the illusion is actually sincere. That's how bad that can get. It can get to the stage where we believe the way in which we be ourselves, if we could put ourselves in quotation marks for all those who can't see my comments, and if we be ourselves, then for most of us we believe what we've become as an adult is ourselves. And actually for the majority of the cases, that's not true at all. We've learnt to present the illusion of ourselves, and we have even come to accept the illusion as if it's real. And that becomes very difficult now for us to be able to determine when we are sincere, even for ourselves, to determine that for ourselves. And it's a big problem in terms of how we're brought up as children, and the illusion that then is created as an adult, that we are being nice and kind, and we're being considerate of others, and we're being, loving towards others, and yet all of it, for the most part, has been trained into us as children to present the illusion of all of those things rather than the reality of it all. So this is why when most people on earth pass into the spirit world, they don't pass into the 6th or 7th sphere or in some area that's highly developed in love, because they have bought into their own illusion, and they pass expecting to be, if they believe in the spirit world at all, they expect to be passing into a good state, only to find themselves usually quite deep in the hells in the first sphere. And the environment is now saying to them, this is where you deserve to be, given the condition of love that you're exhibiting. And the person is going, how did this happen? And they're totally surprised. And it's very interesting when you spend time welcoming people into the spirit world, because the amount of people, when you have to take them to the place where they actually are going to live for the first part of their life in the spirit world, the majority of people are absolutely shocked about the conditions. Like, absolutely shocked. For many, it's like for many of you living in your comfortable homes now and then being ushered into a rubbish dump in the spirit world. And that's where you've got to live. Right? That's how shocked most people find themselves when they pass. It's very rare that a person is actually accurately assessed where they will pass and actually expected to be there. Ironically, the people who are often quite self-determined to be evil do expect, if there is a spirit world, that they will be in those locations. So often they are the persons who are least shocked, right? And the people on earth who believe themselves to be good and kind and considerate and everything and loving, often they are the people who are most shocked. And quite often those people who believe themselves to be good and kind and considerate and loving are religious people, right? And so oftentimes it's the religious people who are the most shocked, because they have lived a life seemingly on the outside in agreement with the principles that they might have learnt from a holy book like the Bible or the Quran or something like that. but internally they've never really agreed with it. Never really sincerely agreed with it inside of themselves. And frequently they are the people who are most shocked about their passing. So it is often also the case that the people in the West are more shocked than the people in third world countries. And there's many good reasons for that. And one good reason is that many of us in the West are used to getting what we want, when we want it, how we want it, without any consideration of the ramifications of that on others. But people in the third world frequently are struggling to even just survive. And so when they enter the spirit world and are still struggling to survive, or that's the feeling they have, it's no different. But when a person from the first world enters the spirit world and now is struggling, for him or her it is very different. And so there is often this large contrast that occurs. And when you're one of the people welcoming them and taking them to the location where they'll eventually live for at least a short period of time until their condition of love improves, you're the one who has to deal with the level of shock they're in to a degree. Yeah. So the real then question becomes, as Rani asked, are there individual things where I'm demonstrating at least some sincerity? Or is there generally a flavour of insincerity about almost everything? And and how do I deal with one or the other things if one or the other things are true? Now, the thing to bear in mind is that each person is an individual. So that's the first thing we need to remember when we're answering questions like this. Each individual has had their own upbringing and their own way of dealing things based upon a combination of their upbringing, their circumstances and their personality, the way in which they dealt with those events of their childhood. And of course, for each person, those things will be different. So how you deal with the issue of sincerity is going to be different. Right? However, it can be said generally that on earth, the majority of us have been taught, and this applies third world or first world, the majority of us have been taught to present an illusion to others under certain circumstances. And we've learnt to do this, the majority of us have learnt to do this, without any consideration of the ethics or morality of doing it. We've believed it's doing the right thing, even though we haven't felt the right thing. And many of us have the approach to life that, I do feel like doing this unloving thing, but I'll control myself from doing that unloving thing, and I'll do the right thing instead. And if you think about most religious movements, the basic tenets are encouraging that. Where they're basically saying, you're all sinners. So, in other words, you're all bad people fundamentally, is really what the underlying presentation is. And what you've got to do is try to be better, right? Without actually being better, without actually feeling inside better. We've got to try to be better. And this creates this separation between what is really going on in our soul compared to what we think we feel in our mind. So there's a huge separation between those two states. And because there is that huge separation, sincerity now becomes very difficult as God measures it, because he's measuring what's going on in the soul. And that's the only thing his laws measure. Right? To God, you are a soul, not a body. Your body is like, what did we say in one group? It was like a sleeve, a flesh suit, right? In the case of a flesh body. And the spirit body is really a spirit suit, if you like, which is controlled by the soul. So, if the soul is the thing we're ignoring, and we're focusing our attention on how things look and how we're presenting everything, can you see what we're doing internally to ourselves is separating ourselves from any point of sincerity as God would measure it. We're creating a gulf between the real condition of our soul and what our condition actually is now, what we believe it to be. If my approach to growth, what I believe to be growth, is to try harder, and how many of you, since I've met you, have had that view? Well, just try harder and everything will work, right? For almost everyone, right? So if our approach is to try harder, that is basically evidence that we still don't understand that the soul has to change, right, somehow. And understanding how the soul changes is not necessarily about trying harder, right? There's things that are in the soul that have got to come out of it. And if you try hard to overcome them, you're really trying hard to suppress them. So they are going to stay there. They are going to stay inside of the soul. Those things that you're trying hard to overcome will remain there. The only way you can really overcome something is by it being released from your soul. So it no longer being in your soul. And when it's no longer in your soul, you don't have to try hard to overcome it anymore. Right? In fact, it's just a natural process where you overcome it naturally. As a result of it being gone from the soul, it is now gone from anything you would choose to do with your behaviour as a result. So every problem that we approach generally when it comes to self-improvement, if we can call it self-improvement, because we remember Divine Truth is not a self-improvement program. It's a God relationship program. Understand? So, but when it comes to self-improvement with anything else we've tried, and this applies also all the way through our childhood. You remember when you first went to school, you had to learn your times tables. Did you learn them in your soul? No, it wasn't anything to do with the soul involved with it, was it? It was all rote, reply, remember. It was all about intellectual responses, wasn't it? And if you look at the way we're educated as children, even now, for the most part, it's all about developing the intellect, developing the mind. So we are taught all the way through our childhood, not only by our parents who want us to sort of separate our life from our emotions, but also from society, all the way through our education process. The education process is basically saying to you, forget about what you feel about it, right? You got to learn this. Try harder. Put more effort in, you know. This is why, you know, when you think of education nowadays, you can see, you know, kids are given a lot of homework, aren't they? Particularly by the time they get into sort of Charlie's age, there's sort of lots of homework. Got to remember everything, got to read everything, got to reply the right way. And all this has done is distanced themselves from the soul and how it feels and what is really going on in it. Now, if you really loved maths, so how many of you have really done that in your life? Some of you? Yeah, very few actually really love it, right? But if you really love it, you like maths in your feelings, don't you? And so you don't have to remember everything. It sort of feels more natural. And it's like, now for many of you, you can relate when it comes to songs or music. If you really like music, does somebody have to force you to listen to it? No. Does somebody have to force you to learn how to play it? No. But if somebody sat you down at piano, like, you know, an hour a day, all of your childhood, by the time you get to your teenage life, how do you feel? You probably don't like it very much, right? For the most part. Either that or you're really good because you eventually learnt to like it because there's nothing else to like. But usually what happens is the average person gets very distant from their soul feelings about a thing. there are some parts of our life where distance from our soul feelings are less noticeable. When I say less noticeable, what I mean is there's some parts where we are inclined to the soul feeling, right? And so therefore have detuned less from it. An example of that is music, where most people are inclined towards the soul feeling, and so they're less detuned from music than they are in other areas of their life. But when it comes to something like maths, now the majority of people are quite detuned, right? And so, in answer to the Rani's question, a lot of the times our detunement, there is a generalised, as you can see from that discussion, there is a generalised attitude of detunement in society. So this is why all of us have a generalised detunement from our true soul condition. There is also a generalised view that the way you progress is to just try harder to overcome, right? And that is also a generalised view of how to progress in anything, in any form of endeavour. So that is a general feeling the average society has, all society. You could say that is the general thing we're going to have to overcome when it comes to our sincerity. These attitudes that are being given to us, that are a part of our lives, and they've been a part of our lives all of our life, for the most part, about almost everything we do, right? But then there's also going to be some areas where we are more detuned than average, and some areas where we're going to be less detuned than average, based upon what we had a soul affiliation towards at the time and what we were allowed to develop while being sincere in our childhood. And those things will be general, not general, in nature, but they will be specific in nature. And they are areas where we'll have to overcome our lack of sincerity in those specific areas as well. So all of us will have to overcome a lack of sincerity in these general areas. And then we will have individual to us and individual to our nature and our personality and individual to our experience, we'll have specific things that are going to be much worse than others and specific things that might be better than others. And this is why you've got to give up comparing yourself with another, because everything is so uniquely individual, and it's only by working through the uniquely individual problems that you'll eventually be refined, right? The general problems we'll all have to solve, the whole lot of us. And for the most part, we have quite a lot of them, right? Quite a lot of problems. Yeah, so you can see, in answer to the question Rani raised, you're going to have there's going to be things that are global in nature that are affecting your sincerity and that everybody else also has to deal with. And then there's going to be things specific to your own life, upbringing, choices that you're going to have to deal with that other people might not have to deal with. Yep. And both are going to be required to be dealt with in order for you to become sincere, as God measures sincerity. That answer your question? That was it.
So eventually you'll end up in a state of sincerity. Is that true?
When you become one with God, you'll be in a permanent state of sincerity. Yeah.
But before that, so you can be sometimes in a state of sincerity on some issues like this global thing, and sometimes not, dependent on...
Yeah, the general course of events are you have to do with the global things first, and then you become generally sincere about those things. Yeah. And then on certain issues, you're still insincere.
Yep.
Does that make sense? And they are the individual issues you'll have to deal with. Yep. So there is a general process most people follow, is they become generally sincere, particularly about the issues of putting forward a facade of frontage and also being rewarded for that and all those things. They all have to be dealt with. And every person needs to deal with those things. And the average person has to deal with those things before they're capable of any self-analysis with regard to the personal issues.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So for the most part, it's going to be, I get to a stage where I feel like now I feel sort of sincere. Well, you get to the stage where you feel sincere on most things, right? But you also know, oh, there I go with some insincerity again on that thing over there that's unique to me and unique to my circumstance. Yeah.
Yeah.
So for me, it was pretty easy to get sincere about a lot of issues, but not very easy to get sincere about the issues of loving self. So just because of the way I was brought up and what I was taught in the childhood, harder to get sincere about that. And that's where I get a lot of attack from spirits as well, so it's harder. Whereas for other people, it might be completely opposite of that. That it just depends a bit. But for all of us, we'll have an issue of getting sincere, particularly emotionally sincere. Because you can see with our emotional belief systems, the majority of us do believe covering up our emotions is the best course of action. Yep. And if not covering them up, at least controlling them in some way or another. And now, I'm not suggesting that a person should be uncontrolled emotionally, because if you're in a rage and you're uncontrolled emotionally, then of course you can become a murderer quite quickly, right? So I'm not suggesting that, but I am suggesting that you need to allow in private times your uncontrolled emotion in particular, and you need to get to a stage where there's no taints of your uncontrolled emotion, so that you can now have uncontrolled emotion in public. Uncontrolled emotion in public is only dangerous if those emotions are evil. If those emotions are not evil, then they're not dangerous. Right? The problem for many of us is our emotions are quite evil, right? And so if we allowed them to be uncontrolled in public, we could actually become very dangerous. And there's plenty of instances in society where you see that occurring. So a part of growth is learning how to have uncontrolled emotions in a private manner first, generally, and working your way through them sincerely so you recognise what they are, to the point where you can release them and therefore be able to be let loose in public. Isn't that how it really is? Yeah. It's sort of like, well, if you've got these emotions in public and you let loose them in public, then that might be dangerous, but you need to learn how to do that privately first, don't you? And then you sort of progress to be let loose in public. And then you're pretty good. Yeah. So our growth is going to be very dependent upon our ability to firstly recognise those global issues where a lack of sincerity is already in our soul, and to work our way through them as much as we can and as rapidly as we can first. And then be aware that after we've done that, it's not going to be finished, because there will be areas where we personally are struggling that will need to also be addressed when it comes to our sincerity. Archie?
Will be general or like sort of global areas that we need to become sincere in? Is there sort of like relationship with God? Sort of, could you say more about sort of what are they sort of like? Just a few examples.
Well, if we look at some of those areas, the first one would be how you respond to emotion. That's a big global area on the planet. The general view on the planet is you've got to always be emotionally controlled. And there is a very strong view on the planet too that if you're not emotionally controlled, you're unstable. And so you're almost treated like, you've got some kind of mental illness of some kind. If you have emotions that are sort of beyond the strength of what a normal person believes is normal, So an example of that you see a lot at the time of a loved one dying. You'll often see a person just having a good cry, which they need to have, obviously, right? But people want to put them on antidepressants. And I'm going, well, surely they need to process their grief. Like, it's sad that their friend or their loved one died, and obviously there were attachments that they need to work through as to why they feel so sad about it. And surely they need to go through that grief, and they need to learn how to manage, not just manage it, but learn how to actually go through grief and come out the other end of grief. They need to learn how to do that. But the average person on the planet goes, oh no, there's a certain amount of grief that's okay, you know, and then beyond that it's all too much now. Or there's this view that, oh, now they're just, and they could be faking it, couldn't they? Milking it for what the situation is worth, which often happens. But people go, let's medicate them up a bit and see what happens and see whether everything calms down. And so the issue of dealing with emotions is a big issue, right? The average person on earth is taught that stoicism is far more powerful than feeling your emotions. And there is a great deal of condescension towards a person who feels emotions. So that's a huge area to work on. Secondly, most of us are brought up to have an illusion about our condition. We're brought up to, there's little instruction given to children about morals and ethics. And you see this happening all the time, particularly nowadays. You see it happening quite a lot. It's, you know, hundreds of years ago, there were people who had some ethics were less prone to this, but nowadays it's very much about how everything looks, not so much how everything is. And so there's a lot of unethical behaviour that is encouraged frequently, both in the family and also, you know, in society generally. So another area that we're going to have to look at globally is our lack of morality and our lack of ethics. So morality being God's view of what is right and wrong, and ethics being what is good for me should also be good for you. Right? And what is bad for me should also be bad for you. In other words, some kind of equality in the way we deal with the problem. Those two issues are major problems on earth at the moment with regard to our sincerity. Majority of us will do things in private that we would never do in public. Right? And many of us have a complete view that what I choose to do in my life towards another is always justified, but what they do to me is never justified. So we have a hypocritical, unbalanced view of equality. We basically view, we say we're all equal, but we're sort of like the book about communism? Some people are Animal Farm. Some people are more equal than others. And I happen to be one of those. People who are more equal than others is the general feeling. So that is an issue of insincerity. So an example of that is, you know, why do I give more to my family than to my friend, to people who I don't even know? Or why do I spend more time with my friends than I would spend with people who are not my friends? Why do I give more to family members but not to other people who are in need? These are examples of the lack of ethics that means that we're being insincere when it comes to our expressions of love. So that would have to be considered as well. Then there's facing the truth about oneself, which is a huge issue for the majority of us. The reason why it's so big is because we, for the most part, want to see ourselves in a good light, and we're very prone to ignoring anything that is opposite to a good light. And even our parents, usually with us, were very prone to do the same thing. So when you think of your own children, you go, for the most part, a lot of parents will go, they're my children, so they're automatically better than somebody else's children. Right? Just because they're mine, they're automatically better than someone else's. And we're not in that state open to seeing the true state of the morality of the child, of the soul condition of the child. We're not in the state where we can analyse that well. And so we promote our children's, our children being better than others, for the most part, while at the same time not truly seeing the condition of the child. So we promote them as being better because they're our children, but we're not seeing the moral condition of the children. This is why the majority of people, as parents, are shocked when their child does something illegal or like what the parent themselves, has viewed as evil. They're shocked. And yet, if you felt the child's soul, you wouldn't be shocked, because you could feel the inclination towards that condition already, right? But for the majority of parents, they're absolutely shocked when something goes wrong, where the child does something bad, and to the point where most parents won't even believe it, even though there's evidence and proof that it's even happened. They still won't believe it, because they can't believe their child could have done it. And why can't they believe it? If they could feel the soul of their child, they would know the child would have been prone to doing it. So that wouldn't make any sense, aside from the parent being quite disconnected and also encouraging the child's disconnection between their true state and what's really, and the facade, the image of themselves that's going on. So our ability to see ourselves truthfully is a major problem we have. And again, the majority of us have been taught to not see ourselves truthfully from childhood. That's been something we've been taught to do. It's not that we've just been left up to our own devices and come to that conclusion for the most part. For the most part, our parents have encouraged us to not see what's really going on inside of our soul, because for most parents, they've already at the state of encouraging themselves to do the same thing. And to have their child do something different would be challenging. And so they don't want that challenge. And so most of us have also this inability to see ourselves very truthfully. So fortunately, God sees everything. And the law measures everything. If God didn't see everything and the law measure everything, all of us would be getting away with a lot of these immoral behaviour, unethical behaviour. We'd be getting away with a lack of truthfulness, a lack of sincerity. The issue with your relationship with God is you are not going to get away with those things. Now, once you appreciate that and you see how wonderful that is, you'll enjoy it. But when you begin, you hate it. It's like, how dare the person tell me this or that, or how dare God, show up this or that. And so we frequently don't want to see what's going on. So so there's 5 issues that I just listed out. They're going to be the primary ones. Yeah. And then you can see also there are beliefs on earth. There are beliefs on earth that are quite clearly in error. And an example of that is the average person's belief about God is in complete error. They many times believe God to be punishing, just like their parents were. They many times believe either that God doesn't exist, or if God does exist, he doesn't care, or if he does care, that he's punishing. One of those 3 things generally. When you look at that, you can see the fundamental belief I have about God is that God will either punish me for my sins, or, if God doesn't exist or God doesn't care, completely ignore that I sin. Right? And of course, either of those 2 viewpoints is going to motivate us into certain types of behaviour. The first 2 viewpoints, God doesn't care or God doesn't exist, is going to motivate me into being the arbiter of my own choices and decisions without there being any a fundamental belief about law. And I will start to believe that I'm a completely uncontrolled being, and the only person who's going to arbitrate my behaviour is myself. And therefore how I see myself just matters to me. And what I do in my life just matters to me. Now, with that view, I can do a lot of things that are justified that other people would be damaged by, but I feel justified doing. And I also feel there is no punishment for doing such things. There's, if I don't get caught by the law of the land, then I'm scot-free, is the average view. Now, of course, God's law catches you every time. So that's not what's actually happening. But it is what we often want to happen or believe is happening. So when I don't believe in God or I believe God doesn't care, so if that's my faith, then obviously that faith is going to cause me to undertake many insincere actions and do it for the sake of my own comfort or expedience. Right? If I believe God does care and God has laws and he's going to punish me, and he's really a punishing God, not a God who's trying to correct me, then a lot of my actions are going to be governed by fear. I'll be afraid to do the things I want to do. So I'll measure something in my soul and go, yeah, I really want to do that thing. But I know if I believe in God or I've been taught to believe in God this way, I'll know that God's going to punish me for that thing that I'm trying to do or that I'd like to do. So I'm going to control my behaviour and stop myself from doing it. Now, the only trouble with that is now I'm insincere as God's law measures me. Because I've got something in my soul that's saying, do this, and I'm in my mind, I'm saying, I can't do that because that would be wrong, and I'm going to do this instead. But I haven't changed what's in my soul. So, under those circumstances, what do I do? You can see I'm going to try harder, but become more and more distant from my soul's condition. You can see even my belief in God is going to sort of taint the way in which I believe in God is going to taint my sincerity one way or the other if my belief in God is not accurate. Nikki?
Could you have a mix of things though as well, because there's some issues where I feel like God's going to punish me on, and then there's some where I feel like God's going to be alright with me, he's going to pander and that kind of stuff. So
that's very true, but what would that depend upon? It'd be your upbringing, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
The way your parents punished you in certain ways, you'd think God was probably going to punish you the same way. And then if your parents let you get away with certain things, you're going to think God's going to let you get away with those things too, probably.
And it feels very much like the masculine side of God is going to punish me.
Yeah. And the feminine side of God is really nice and kind to me. And that's about your mum and dad, isn't it?
Exactly.
Because I can ask many others here about whether they think their mum's going to do the same. They often feel completely the opposite, right, to that. So there are many whose mum have been highly competitive and very nasty to them. And so, they feel completely opposite to you. Yeah.
So you can get the mix depending on the issue you've got.
Correct.
And then depending on how you grow your sincerity on the issues can be different on both sides of them, really.
Correct. Yeah. And often how you were brought up by your father is completely different to how you were brought up by your mother, isn't it?
And then it's confusing because sometimes it's like, well, maybe some parts of how I was brought up by one parent was actually good.
Yeah.
But then the other parent thought that was bad because they've got an issue with the other parent.
Yeah.
And then you're all confused, aren't you? And it's like with God, it's like, well, this should work, God. I'm doing this, and it's not.
Yeah.
And it gets to a case of you have to be so reflective to.
And who drives the reflection?
Myself.
Yeah. Myself.
Yeah.
Yeah, you really are going to need to be sincere to do that, aren't you? Yeah. Anna?
My father wanted me to be 5. That's
wanted you to
5. That's the grade system in Sweden. You get 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. 5 is the best.
Oh, okay. For us in Australia, it's A, B, C, D, E, F.
Yeah. Okay. That's
what's the last one? U or something.
The top. Okay. Oh, that's 5. So that sort of has driven my whole life.
Yeah.
In all areas.
Yeah.
Where I sort of coming here and wanting to be good and achieving and perfect and not having the right feeling.
Yeah, well, it's sort of the trouble with that kind of system where you're graded for everything you do is that you end up feeling that once you achieve grade 5, you're great, right? And there's no measurement of, do I actually feel great? Yeah, there's no thing based upon the feelings anymore. And so, this is going to be, again, something that's going to have a big effect on you. And then, of course, society has done the same thing, hasn't it? When we go to school, it's not like everybody gets it. Nowadays, it's interesting, though, too. I'll talk about the two sides of things that are happening now. But in our day, 60 years ago, whatever, in our day, it's, you were graded and that was it. There was nothing, there was no reward for anything where you tried. It was like you either got the mark or you didn't, and if you didn't, then you failed or you succeeded. Nowadays, it's like if you try, well, it's not even now if you try, if you just participate, now you get a grade.
Show up.
Sort of just show up, you get a grade. And that in itself causes its own problems, actually, because it means that nobody strives for excellence. But striving for excellence shouldn't be driven by the need for approval from a parent. It should be driven by the desire to be the best you can be inside of yourself. So it encourages people. So there's so many things wrong with different schooling methods, because each one of them have their own problems that usually cause a lack of sincerity in the adult. Yeah. And of course, if God's law is measuring sincerity, and I'm saying it is, then of course it's going to be difficult, isn't it? Under all these circumstances, to clear out all the mud from the, and actually see clearly the state of play in our life as to what's going on.
I also think that's the reason why I have reacted as when I got feedback from you.
Yeah.
Because then you were saying to me, you are not a 5.
Yeah. That's right. And for the other problem we have, which we haven't even discussed yet, is the majority of us are quite, our worth is very much tied in to our performance. And so when somebody tells us we're not performing, we also believe they're telling us that we're worthless. And then we have a lot of complex problems that arise from that as well, in terms of emotionally complex problems, because we then become quite resistive to what could be very helpful feedback. But we have become so resistive to it because we feel that our worth is getting pulled down. We feel that somebody's actually criticising the true person, the true being we are, rather than actually saying, no, there's areas that are not sincere. And they're actually criticising the insincerity. You could also call it another way, couldn't you? You could say they're criticising the fact you got mud splattered all over you and you should go and have a wash. Do you know what I mean? Rather than saying your whole body's a wreck and you should just give it up and shoot yourself. That's the feeling that we have when somebody tells us the truth. That's really like when we're married or we're actually, our worth is involved. We feel when somebody's telling us it's true, it's either what, they're telling me I've got to rub myself out altogether or what are they telling me? But we're often not seeing it. It's just a flaw that can be easily released. And this is the fundamental, if you think about one of the fundamental teachings that we shared with Paget as well, was that your soul was created perfect. God didn't create you with flaws. Right? All of your personalities and your nature is unique, but you didn't have any character flaws when he created you. And you are also capable of not having any character flaws and still having a personality. Not all robots, but all without character flaw. Character flaw being the lack of ethics or the lack of morality. None of those things need to exist in you. But if you think about, again, the general feeling on earth, amongst all people who believe in progress, is that we're fundamentally sinners. And we are built with flaws that we're trying to overcome, rather than the flaws that have attached themselves to us, experiences that have attached themselves to us, that we need to get rid of. And because we have this view that our flaws have become a part of us, when somebody criticises our flaws, we think they're criticising us. And therefore we're going to be very prone to not progressing. Yeah, very prone to rigidly holding on and even defending the flaws, because we believe they are a part of our true nature or character. Yeah. Nikki?
I've got a question about this whole thing, Jesus, with where does God fit in with all of this? Because when you've got so much stuff going on, sometimes like opposing stuff, and then you've got spirits around you as well.
Yep, which complicate things a bit more.
Which complicate it more. How can you hear God? Like, how can you hear God's voice amongst your own issues? And then,
well, the very first thing that needs to be said about that, though, Nikki, is when we're insincere, we really don't want to hear God's voice. So that's where the majority of us want to hear what we want to hear. We don't want to hear anything other than something nice about ourselves. Basically, that's fundamentally what we want. So we're not prepared to hear God's voice about almost any matter, for the most part. What we're looking for is our own voice reflected in God. In other words, we're looking for our own opinions, for God to say, yeah, they're mine too. That's what we're looking for. We're looking for agreement from God. Now, of course, that's not a very sincere place, but that is what we're looking for. The reason why we're looking for that is because agreement means that we don't have to change anything. It means we're already fine and we don't have to do anything else. And so the majority of us are looking for that. And in that place, any prayer we have is completely insincere. Because we're basically asking God to just confirm what we already think we know. Now, I find this very interesting because when we travel, Mary and I travel a lot, meet a lot of people, right? And all through the last 2,000 years, this has been the case. When we first meet a person, generally we get conversing and we get to know them a bit, and eventually they start asking some questions about themselves, about, well, how do I do this or how do I do that? What's my state now? Or those kind of questions. And almost without exception, when you start telling them the truth that you know from God about the situation, there's always this very powerful knee-jerk reaction of they didn't want to hear it. It's very interesting. They ask the question, but they're not listening to an answer. Now, what causes a person... You think of a child when it asks the question. A child asks the question and they listen to the answer. So what causes a person to ask a question and not listen to the answer?
An addiction. They're wanting like a confirmation about how they see themselves.
Yeah, so they're not asking a question, are they?
They're not. There's no feeling of truth in the question.
Well, they're not even asking a question. The real question they should be asking is, I believe this is what I'm like. Can you agree with me, please? That's really what they're saying. The question is, can you please agree with me? And I notice this a lot in our seminars. People ask questions, but a lot of the times they're just asking for agreement. And really what they should be doing is instead of asking a question, making a statement. I think I'm like this. And I go, fair enough. I don't agree, but you know what I mean? Like, that would be more honest. But interestingly, even in our childhood, we've been taught that if you do believe something about yourself, you're not allowed to just come out and say it, really. Far more polite to ask a question about it than it is to actually come out and make a statement. But if you think about it from a sincerity perspective, a lot of times with our relationship with God, we're making statements to God that we want God to agree with. but we're couching them as questions. And the fact that many of us do that when we're listening to divine truth is proof that many of us are doing that with God. Right? When you're truly asking a question, you are not going to be antagonistic towards the answer. Even if that answer is completely false, you will be able to hear it and think about it and then work out whether it's false or not. Right? But when you're antagonistic in terms of you have an emotional response to the answer, after you've asked a question, it means you didn't want the answer. You wanted what you believe the answer should be. Right? Now, most of us have that injury. And so when we ask questions as adults, we haven't got an open heart for the answer. We've only got an open heart to have an agreement. And that's the reason why we're asking it as a question. So these problems are problems that we face with our sincerity. If I'm insincere in this regard, you remember God's laws are like intricate. They, as the Paget message has said in one message, it grinds very finely, the law, God's laws. So when God's law is grinding through our questions, it's going, yeah, that wasn't sincere. Yeah, that wasn't sincere either. That wasn't sincere either. That wasn't sincere. Oh, there's one that was sincere. I can respond to that one. And God will respond instantly to anything that's sincere. And that is the thing to remember, that God is not going to be backward in coming forward with response unless you are insincere. So if the Lord and God is measuring my sincerity, and very frequently I am thinking I'm praying but I'm not receiving responses, then what I'm doing is not praying. Bearing in mind that a prayer is a sincere longing with God. So in the case of truth, it would be a sincere longing from God for his truth. That's what it would be. That would be a prayer for truth. A prayer for love would be a sincere longing for God's love. That would be a prayer for love, right? And if there is no response, that immediately tells us the answer. You weren't sincere. Right? And that's a good thing to know that. I find it interesting, though, that many people who have read the Paget messages, for example, go, oh, but, there are times, maybe we just didn't feel it. Or maybe it just wasn't, maybe God's going to take his time answering that. You hear that a lot, Why would God take his time? He doesn't need to take time for anything. He can answer anything instantly. Why does he need to take time? He doesn't need to take time. Now, he knows you might need time because you might need to sort some things out with your sincerity. But as soon as you are sincere, he will respond. Right? He's not going to delay any response for any other reason than the law measures you as being insincere. So this is the thing you need to bear in mind in your relationship with God, is that unless I am getting a response, then I've got to look strongly at my lack of sincerity. And particularly look at, am I asking things of God that I want a certain answer, and I know what I want. I want the answer to be yes on that one or no on that one. Do you know what I mean? I've already determined in my own mind what I want the answer to be. Is that how it is? Because if that is how it is, then you're not going to get very many answers except where your question is in agreement with God's. Yeah. Oh.
Could it be that I ask a question to God where I am sincere but still not able to feel an answer?
No, this is the thing about sincerity, Ulf. When you're sincere, it automatically opens you to your feelings. In fact, you can't be sincere without your feelings being involved. So the answer to that question is actually no. If you're not receiving a response, It's not because you're not sensitive enough. It's because your question was not sincere. Because if it was sincere, your emotions would have been involved, and therefore you would have been sensitive enough to receive a response. Yeah? And you can see this a lot with the expression of love if you think about it. When a person's quite insincere in their expression of love, they might say the words "I love you" or whatever, but their actions are completely devoid of any feelings that motivate them to demonstrate that love to you in one way or the other. Make sense? True sincerity opens your heart to the response. That's why the law requires sincerity. God knows that it's pointless giving you a response if you're not sincere, because your heart's not open to the response. The reason why the law is working like it works is when you are sincere, your heart becomes open to receiving. Make sense? Now, when God gives you the response, you are now able to feel and receive that response. But when you're insincere, your heart is closed. So if God tried to respond, what would happen? It would be like bouncing off a brick wall. Nothing would enter you anyway. There's no point in responding to the insincerity because nothing's going to enter. You follow? So, when it comes to your relationship with God, the reason why the law requires sincerity is because sincerity is what opens your heart to receive. If the law just said, no, sincerity is not required, then when you asked for something and your heart was closed, you imagine God would be sharing with all these people whose hearts are closed, and all this energy would be going out, but it would be going nowhere. So that's not how God works with his soul. And by the way, he recommends you don't work that way with yours either. It's interesting. And this is an interesting fact about love, just natural love. God recommends that you share your love with the people who are open to receiving it. Makes sense? Yeah. Because if you share it with the people who are not open to receiving it, then they're probably not going to receive it. Yeah. Now, of course, a lot of times there is openness in an individual in a moment that then closes in another moment. Isn't it? Like, sometimes that happens too, doesn't it? Where a person has an emotional thing going on, they start to feel some things, all of a sudden they're sincere, they might ask a question and you start sharing, and initially they're receiving it because their heart is now open, but then I've sometimes noticed people just, the more they're getting, the harder it's getting to receive it, and their sincerity starts closing down again. And then by the time that's closed, you've got to stop. Because nothing's going to go in now. Right? So I often feel it's sort of like an empty bottle of water, an empty bottle. And let's say the response is the water. Now, of course, if the lid's on, it's going to go everywhere but in the bottle, isn't it? Yeah? And if our soul is the bottle, it requires the lid to be off. And sincerity is what gets the lid off. Suze.
That's the definition of humility, isn't it?
I don't think so.
No?
No. No is my answer to that, no. The definition of humility is what comes from within inside of you. And what comes from inside of you is you feeling your emotions all the time is your humility. But just because you feel your emotions, it doesn't mean that one of those emotions might be insincerity. You understand? You could have emotions in you that are completely insincere. So an example of that is anger. Yeah. A completely insincere emotion. You follow? Mm-hmm. So you can be choosing to feel your emotion and still be insincere. So you can be humble but still insincere.
Yeah. Because I'm somebody, as you know, who has a very strong facade.
Yep.
And my question is, how, like, I still feel the things that I do. You know, if I obviously have a lot of confusion around it,
Yep.
but a lot of the things from the feedback that I get that I think are sincere, that I'm feeling them,
Yeah.
are completely out of whack. And
Well, you're being told they are, but you don't agree they are.
well, no, I don't get that feeling. And
That's
so
right.
How, in the situation that I'm in now,
Yeah.
where a lot of my feelings are wrong, apparently.
Apparently.
Yeah.
You don't feel they're wrong.
No.
No. So let's make sure we're separate to that. Clear that you're being told at times, no, that's an insincere thing you're doing now.
That's right.
And you feel you're being sincere.
Yes.
You believe
exactly.
you're being sincere.
Yeah.
Yep.
So how do I tell?
Well, this is what I've been talking about the last 2 weeks, haven't we? How do you tell? If your motivation is to continue to believe what you believe, even though people around you are telling you differently. So an example of this, let's forget about Sue for a moment.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go to a man, some fictional man, who's got a problem. And the problem is that he is basically quite sexually sleazy with every woman he meets. And every woman he meets, every woman feels like, oh, there he goes again, trying to, take from me sexually. And he's always flirtatious and all that kind of stuff. But he believes he isn't. So it's fundamentally the same problem, isn't it? You're being told something from other people, but you believe that's not true. This man, believes he's fine. He's sincere in his affection for women.
Right.
He believes himself to be sincere. And yet, he's sexually sleazy and most of the women are uncomfortable with it. And all the women start, if they're honest enough, they start telling him, there you go again. There you go again. I can't be around you while you're doing this. You're trying to take sexual feelings from me, or you want me to give you sexual feelings all the time. I don't want to do it. Stay away from me. But can you see, even with all of that feedback, he can still go, it's all their problem. They've all got problems. I'm a nice guy. They've all got problems. What is going to stop him from thinking he's a nice guy without a problem and cause him to think more deeply about the matter? What's going to change him to go, well, I'm getting told over and over again from different people, and perhaps from people he even respected in the past. He's getting told these things, and yet he just feels they're wrong. What's going to get him to change and start to question whether he is right or not? Because that's the question you're asking me, really, about your situation. It's just a different situation, right? What causes a person to not focus so much on their own beliefs about themselves and to start to listen to the potential of others who care about them, sharing with them what's actually going on? What causes that change? It's a good question, isn't it? Because it's sort of like, if that man continues to believe that his actions are not sexually sleazy, he's just going to continue doing the same thing with everyone. Eventually the women are going to stop telling him and they're just going to stay away from him, aren't they? And it's only the women who like to be flirtatious or like a man flirting with them that are going to want to accept the feelings, right? But this man, he really can't be told. So what's causing him to believe that his own beliefs are, you could say, more true than what he's being told?
Well, I can only bring that back to my own case.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess it's like, for me, it's like an ingrained feeling that this is who I am.
Well, yeah, if you look at that man for a moment, again, we'll try and separate the problem from you, is what I'm trying to do.
Right.
And say, let's look at the man who's got this problem, right? Why could he potentially have the problem? Like, what things could be going on inside of him to cause him to believe that his view is right and everybody else's view is wrong?
An injury, something that happened in childhood? Or?
Well, let's be more specific. What feelings does he have to have in order? So I'll give you an example. If he's been taught in his childhood that he can do no wrong, and he's quite addicted to the belief because it makes him feel good about himself that he can do no wrong, then when somebody tells him he is wrong, how's he going to respond? Can you see?
Yeah.
He would have to go through an emotion that he can do wrong,
Yes.
wouldn't he?
Yeah.
And if he's been told from childhood that he can't, that's going to be tough.
Yeah.
Because he's had a whole life, he might be in his 50s now or something, or 40s or whatever, and he's had a whole life where he's been told can't do any wrong. And now somebody's telling him that he can do wrong. What? It would be quite a shock, wouldn't it, to him? But also, can you see there must be feelings in him that would cause him to not want to accept it? Feelings in him that he doesn't want to feel. So that could be one thing, isn't it? A set of feelings that he has that cause him to be sleazy, but he doesn't want to feel those feelings. And so he fights for their righteousness, right? Rather than feel they're evil. He fights for them being right. So that could be a major thing for him, couldn't it? He could be addicted to seeing himself as being right, and he now wants to defend the righteous feeling by just... And one way to defend easily without getting angry is just like, you're all wrong. In a condescending way, like, you're all wrong. I don't have to get upset if I believe everybody's wrong, right? I can just go, yeah, I know better than all of you. Say you're all wrong. And anything you now say, I won't assess. Because I automatically believe my view is right. And it also stops me from having any angry response as well to what you may say. Because I already believe I'm right. And I can just go, yeah, you don't know me yet. You don't understand me yet. You don't really get me. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that could be a reason why he does it. What other ones could there be?
Addictions.
What kind of addiction? What are addictions?
Addictions are like a default position whereby you get a consistent good feeling out of something.
Yeah, but why do you have them though? What's the point of them?
To cover over things that you want to avoid or you don't want to feel.
Okay, so if I'm very justified in covering over things I don't want to feel, can you see I'm going to want to ignore any truth about those things? And so I'll dismiss it. I'll just go, no, I think I know better than that.
Yeah.
No, that's not what I'm like. Quite frequently in our discussions with people, it's interesting, Suze, because they outline a whole heap of problems in their life. And then when Mary and I start discussing something with them and telling them why they have those problems in their life, they go, no, it can't be that. There's got to be some other reason why I have that problem. And usually it's because the average person believes it's not their problem. It's somebody else's problem. Right? So, an example of that is quite often when I see people interacting with Eloisa, they believe Eloisa's got a problem. When Eloisa is frank and straightforward and just down the line, which is something she's had to learn to do, by the way.
Yep.
She wasn't like that when I first met her. It's taken her years, since I met her, 2008, 2024. So we're talking 16 years it's taken her to be straight down the line. She's had to learn to do it. for herself in order for her own progress, but also with others. She's had to learn to do it with others too, because she's worked out that it's God's way, right? But initially she wasn't like that, right? So 16 years ago, the average person goes, oh, Eloise is such an easy person to get along with, so nice and everything. And then the very same people we meet today go, oh, she's really changed. She's become this terrible, like, opinionated, person I don't like anymore. And actually, Eloise has become more truthful in that time, which actually means from God's perspective, she's become a more loving person in that time. And yet, people who say the opposite. So why do they say the opposite? It's because whatever she says or is talking about, they don't want to hear. Right? Why wouldn't I want to hear it? It's because I've got emotional reasons in me that I don't want to hear it. So getting back to the man who's got the sexual sleazy problem, and you should recognise that I'm talking about your husband, really, right? Yeah. He doesn't see that he's got it. He doesn't see he's got that problem at all. And Raj, if you listen to this, you know that, right? Yeah. He knows that. And I've said this to him many times. He doesn't see he's got that problem. So he feels that every person who ever raises that with him is wrong.
Yep.
And it's a great defence, if you think about it, because it means any person who says that about me is automatically wrong. Yeah. I don't even have to look at it. I don't even have to examine it. Now, if God's trying to say it to me, am I going to hear it? No. God's voice is much quieter because it's a soul voice. It's a feeling voice coming from God. It's much quieter than a person being outspoken in my ear. And so if I can't hear it directly from a person telling me in my ear and then hear it from multiple people who are telling me the truth about it, how is it going to be that I'm going to hear God about it? I'm not. I am going to stay completely connected to the idea that everybody else is wrong and I'm right on that matter. And I may have many, many justifications for believing that. Now, when it comes to the facade issue, that's the state you're in. You believe in your whole heart that a facade is the best thing you can keep. And you've got that so solid in you from childhood. It's a lot about, family, impressions, how your mum and dad were about in their community, and all these things, displaying themselves a certain way. So it's been done, this is something that's been done to you since the time of birth. So how are you going to change that? Well, you're going to change that the same as the man has to change his idea. He's going to have to learn how to listen to an opinion that is so anti his own opinion of himself. He's going to have to learn to soften to that and open up to that as an idea, isn't he? That's the only way he's going to change. And if he chooses not to, how long is that going to be?
True.
It's going to stay that way. He could stay that way for hundreds of years, couldn't he?
Yeah.
Exactly the same way, because it's going to get down to making the decision himself to actually be more open. And nobody is going to be able to convince him to get more open. He's going to have to make that decision himself. On the issue of facade, this is the issue you face. Nobody is going to be able to convince you. You're going to have to do that for yourself. Yeah. Now, as we asked last week, how does a person get from that place where they are so solid in themselves that they're right about themselves to then start considering that they're not right? Yeah. Now, there are ways to begin that process, aren't there? You can look at your life and you go, is this working for me? That's one way, isn't it? You can measure the results of, why is it that I don't have a lot of close friendships, for example? Yeah, you have acquaintances, a lot of acquaintances, not a lot of close friendships. Why is that? You can start questioning that and go, well, is it to do something with my sincerity? with people, you know, my facade versus the real self. What emotions are coming out of me towards women really, compared to what I think's coming out of me towards women? What are women feeling from me? Now, if it was me, I'd ask them, what do you feel is coming out of me? Because I think I'm doing this. What do you feel is coming out of me? And I would ask the people who feel. I wouldn't ask the people who don't feel. I would ask the people who I know feel, you know, who are at least partially connected to their feelings. I wouldn't go to people who are numb and ask them that question, because they're not going to. They won't know. So you'd have to be able to measure to a degree somebody who has actually progressed on these matters, and then ask them what they feel from you. That can help you, can't it? Because you're asking, and you're asking with a desire to know, and if they are willing to share with you, you can do that. Even better, though, would be to start asking God about the matter rather than just blanking God on the matter. When we are convinced we are right on any matter, we are blanking God on that matter. That's what we're doing. We're not open to receiving God's opinion on the matter. Make sense? Yeah. When I say blanking, what I mean is we're not wanting to hear the answer. We already have an opinion, and all we want is our opinion confirmed. So this is something for you. You want your opinion confirmed with God on the matter of facade. You want God to tell you a facade is good. Just like you want your parents. Your parents were happy to tell you that all your life in your upbringing. Raj wants God to tell him that his sexual sleaziness is not sexual sleaziness. He wants to call it friendliness. His honour of women. That's what he wants to call it. And while he wants to call it that, there's going to be no change. And while you want to call your facade something different, there's going to be no change. And this is why we need to be a lot more open. But there are ways to develop that openness by asking questions, finding out from people, from the point of view of discovering yourself, you know, not from the point of view of criticism or attack of oneself or any of that, but I want to know. I want to know the truth. How is this? How does it feel when I'm around you? How do you feel? So I know that women around you feel a certain way.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah. And I can feel not only your feelings but their feelings when they're around you. Yeah. So it's pretty easy to tell what's going on. But for you it's not, because you've been indoctrinated from childhood to have these facades. And you've been held up by daddy to be superior to other women, including superior to your mother. And that's had a big effect on your life, much bigger than you believe. And that also has an effect on how you treat other women. What you believe is normal treatment, they feel are put-downs. Right? But you don't know that because you've not grown up to see the contrast. You've been in a situation where you've been indoctrinated in that regard. Many men who have been brought up by their mothers to be sleazy with their mothers all the time now feel that's the way they should act with all women. Right. And they don't think of anything different to that. They just don't. And it's not until people talk to them about it, and even then most people get angry first, and then they get frustrated, a bit like you feel now, like, I'm getting told this all the time, but I don't agree. I'm not like that. I think you said that to Mary last week, actually. I think you said that to Mary last week.
Did I?
I'm not like that. That's not what I'm like, yeah. Yeah. And this is most people believe they're not like certain things, but how do you change from that place is the question that we've been trying to discuss for these 2 weeks, right? And how you change is what I'm saying. That's how you change. It's not going to be magical. It's not going to be some magical thing where you wake up morning and say, oh, you know, I'm right or I'm wrong. You know, I'm right, or I know I'm right, or I'm wrong and I know I'm wrong. You're going to have to go through a process to arrive at a conclusion that analyses all the data And at the moment you're not analysing all the data, because there's certain things you don't want to know about it. Make sense? Just like Raj, or the man who's sexually sleazy, there's certain things he doesn't want to know. Just ignores them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you feel about Raj being sexually sleazy?
Well, I've come to realise that that's why I don't feel sexually attracted to him anymore.
So you're angry about it?
Is that what it is?
Well, yes, that's what it is. But you don't even see it as anger, see?
Yeah.
You see it as, oh no, I've just closed down to it.
No, actually, yeah, because I do get quite agitated pointing it out.
Yeah. And he's quite blanking of you. Like he just says, no, that's not true, right? He doesn't even believe it's true. He keeps doing it, so he obviously doesn't believe it's true.
I try to talk to him about when I am attracted to him,
Yeah.
and there are moments where he's soft
Yeah.
and in a completely different emotional state, and I find that I am naturally attracted to him.
Yeah.
And then at another time, he'll make some kind of remark or be in a certain energy,
Yeah.
and I just say to him that's it, that's that place
Yeah.
that stops me from feeling.
Okay, but what I'm saying from his perspective is, he doesn't get it.
Well, I don't know.
Well, he hasn't changed,
No.
so he doesn't get it.
Isn't that a process though, more than...
No. Why? When you say, how can the process of change begin if I already believe I don't need to change?
Yeah, right.
Which was the point we were talking about last week. How can I start the process of change if I already believe I'm right? I'm not going to change, am I? That's the state he's in.
Yeah.
He doesn't believe he's wrong. Now, you are becoming more and more distant from him, and you call it distance, I call it anger.
Okay.
Well, naturally, because you're getting more and more angry about... He's sharing sexual energy with other women all the time, and you're in a relationship.
Right.
There's an issue there, and you want to ignore that issue, so you don't want to call... You tone down your anger, so you don't... And then, of course, if you do get angry, he'll say, you're angry with me now, and this is all wrong. And you're going, well, what about your behaviour, right? You're being sexually sleazy with all the women around us. When's that wrong? Like, oh, no, I'm not doing the wrong thing. So, these are the kind of conversations that you've tried to have in the past, but haven't been very successful having, because you're living with a man who doesn't want to see your problem.
Yeah.
Right? Now, what I'm saying is, on the issue of the facade, you don't want to see the problem.
Right.
So you're doing the same thing with him, but just on a different issue. Right? It's the same thing, different issue. And this is what most of us are like. We've got different issues based upon childhood and different attachments and different emotions. We've got different issues, and we don't want to address them. Right? And on those issues, we believe ourselves to be right. You could say we are self-righteous on the issue. Right? We believe in our own rightness on the issue. Everyone else is wrong about it. If anybody's brave enough to raise it.
I feel, since having feedback from Ello,
Yep.
and having analysed it, and I do talk a bit to maybe Elwyn or and I do try when I'm with people now to evaluate like what the exchange is, like what the energy is, and mostly I have to admit people really don't want to be around me or with me.
A lot of times, yes.
Yeah, a lot of times. So I can see.
But you see it as their problem.
Yeah. I have a really strong desire to come back to God's way.
Yeah.
And be involved.
Yeah. But you still see it as their problem.
Yeah, do I?
You say do I, but if you didn't, you would start feeling like, oh, there's something I can change. At this stage, you feel it's other people need to change.
I feel as though I can see a problem. I don't understand what I have to do personally inside me.
The last 2 weeks have been how to change it. You don't want to do that.
Right, okay.
Yeah. And this is something you're going to have to sincerely address at some point. And you're not being sincere on the matter, is what I'm saying to you. And I don't know if there's much more I can say, because this is what you like at the moment about it.
Yeah.
And actually anybody hearing the conversation knows this is what you like about it. You just don't want to go there with it. And usually when we're in that closed down state, it's because there's emotions we don't want to feel. So that's what I would look at first. What emotions don't I want to feel? Right? When we get into these closed down states where we can't, you're asking a question, I'm giving you the answer, you don't want to receive it. Right? When we're in that state, you're in your heart's closed to receiving the answer. When you're in that state, how do you get yourself out of that state? Because only you can get yourself out of that state. Right. Nobody else can do it for you. So that's what we're trying to address this last 2 weeks, right? How to get out of that state. But how do we do that? Well, there is a growing sense of self-awareness that's going to happen, that you're going to have to want to do yourself. And at this stage you don't want to do it because there's emotions that are tied in with that you're going to have to feel that you don't like to feel. Right? And that's one of the main reasons why people don't do it. Because there's feelings. So there's humble, which is feeling the emotions you don't want to feel in this case. That needs to occur. And that will open you up to then looking at things more sincerely. Right? But sincerity and humility, which was your question, are not the same thing. Humility can open you up to sincerity, right? But sincerity is an issue of where you wholeheartedly want the truth. That's sincerity. Okay. Where you want to live in harmony with that truth and you want to be the truth. That's sincerity. Humility is you want to feel what you feel as a side issue, right, so that you can be sincere. If you need to feel, whatever you need to feel to work through the issues of becoming sincere, then you just need to feel them. That's humility. So humility can lead you to sincerity, right? Certainly. But they're not the same quality. Right. Yeah. Make sense? So that's the answer to your question. I don't think we can say much more about your personal circumstance. Yeah. Just like every time I've tried to talk to Raj about his personal circumstance, there's the same heart block to it. He doesn't want to know. This is one reason why he doesn't come, because we keep saying the same thing and he doesn't want to hear it. Because it is impacting his relationships, even with you, a lot, and he doesn't want to hear that, right? So at some point, what's going to change him to open his heart will only... He has control of that heart. No one else. God has none. And while Raj wants to keep it closed on the matter, and while you want to keep it closed on your matter, no one can help you really, aside from just plugging away saying the same thing over and over and over again. Yep. Until you either get upset about it or you start to look at it more sincerely. Yep. So the risky thing about sharing truth with people, and this is what Mary and I find all the time, is people ask us questions, we give them honest answers, and for the most part, the average person just gets in a rage. And the main reason why that is the case is because, for the most part, we are completely addicted to our own view of ourselves and our own self-righteous view of what is right and wrong. And when somebody tries to tell us something different, even if it's to our advantage, we get angry. Like, I don't know how many people have asked me about why they have cancer. They're dying. And they ask me why they have cancer. I tell them directly, and I never hear from them again. They never want to talk to me again. And yet I just gave them the solution to them not having cancer. And they don't want to hear it. So even something to their benefit, they don't want to hear. And that's how strong our desire is to stay in our own image of ourselves. We can be so strongly motivated to stay seeing ourselves the way we feel is comfortable, that we're prepared to die for it. Literally, a painful death for the sake of it. And anybody who wants to help us, we're prepared to get extremely angry with them for the same reason. And this is where we've got to be so careful, you see, because if you really want to progress and you really want a relationship with God, you're going to have to give that up. That feeling of holding on to the image of oneself. Yep. Thanks, sir.
I'm just like feeling about it. It's like to make that change, you really have to have desire to do it. It's like the number one thing. Like, do I want this? Because if you don't want it, you're never going to go for it. So somehow there's got to be a shift between this, I just don't care, I'm the one, I'm already okay, versus is there something wrong and I need to like have this absolute burning desire to know, otherwise it will never come, because I'm just not going to listen to anything or anyone, it feels like.
Yeah, and that's the thing I want to talk about next, actually.
Cool.
Yeah,
Perfect.
The reason why I want to talk about it is how strong does a desire have to be, and for what does the desire have to be for you to make a change with regard to your sincerity? So let's first look at for what are you going to change your sincerity? Any ideas? Let's start with Helena.
If you really believe it's going to improve your life.
Well, the trouble for many of you with regard to improvement of your life is that you believe meeting addictions improves your life. So, you know, that's a sort of a touch and go one, isn't it? As to what's going to happen with regard to whether it's going to improve your life. And what did I say at the beginning of the discussion last week? I said this isn't an improve your life. This isn't an improve your life discussion. This is not a self-help group. What is it? What are we doing? Die up the back there. What's the purpose of being here, supposedly?
For a greater good, like for a bigger picture.
True, but even more important than that. Yep. It's coming down to Elise.
To have a relationship with God.
Correct. Yep. Now, can you see, going back to Sandy's comment about desire, can you see my desire for a relationship with God is going to have to be pretty strong, isn't it? For me to be at the stage where I'm willing to look at myself about everything. Can you see that? And also, don't forget that I might look at myself about everything and find my partner, like me, Mary, might disagree as well. So God might be saying, this is the direction you need to go, and Mary might be saying, no, I don't want you to go there. What do I do then? Can you see, if I focused also on improving my life, I'm going, I don't want to upset my relationship with Mary, so what am I going to do? If my desire for my relationship with God is not stronger, because I don't see the advantages of my relationship with God over my relationship with Mary, can you see I'll sacrifice my relationship with God and therefore also sacrifice truth for the sake of Mary? Now, of course that wouldn't be good for both Mary and I to do that, would it? But I might not think that way. I might think, no, I want my relationship with Mary. That's more important to me than any other relationship. And so can you see, not only am I going to have a desire for God, but I'm going to have a desire for God above any other relationship. Now that's pretty tricky, isn't it? Particularly when I'm beginning and I don't see the advantages of having a relationship with God. But I do see the advantages of having a relationship with Mary. And so you can see that if my feelings are, I don't have much faith in my relationship with God, and I have more faith in my relationship with Mary, then I am going to choose, under certain circumstances, to sacrifice my development in my relationship with God for my relationship with Mary. Not understanding that actually if I do that, I'm also sacrificing my relationship with Mary. Ironically. You see, because God requires total sincerity from me. If I'm sacrificing that for the sake of my relationship with Mary, I am sacrificing total sincerity so that I can have a relationship with Mary. So I'm not going to have a sincere relationship with Mary either, am I? If you think about it. But that's not the way I'm thinking. The way I'm thinking is, I don't want to sacrifice my relationship with Mary. If I progress the way God wants me to, the net result being that Mary starts getting upset and angry with me for doing that. Now what of my quandary I'm in, aren't I? My desire for my relationship with God is going to possibly wane under those circumstances, and therefore I'm going to be less desirous of sincerity. And that's going to be a big issue for me. Lolly?
I've had to sort of go right back to questioning whether I really believed in God.
Correct. You're going to have to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I keep thinking, oh yeah, I do believe in God. I want this, I want that. And things weren't changing and still not changing, so there's something wrong. And in this question, because I have many reasons why I started to look at things like, why am I argumentative and all of this with you?
Yep.
And you are representing God and all this.
Oh no, I'm not.
Well, you are his messenger, and I was just looking at why I would do that, so that I could discredit you, so that I could discredit God, so that I didn't have to do any changes. And so I went to, what if God is, and what if he is this and he is that, and going to that question and constantly asking, what if God is out there? I started to see all these different aspects of God that I never saw before. I just heard them and never really looked at them, and it was just like, it started to blow my mind out with all the things that, like, here I am doing my little tiny little weeny thing and thinking I'm magnificent, and then I look at what God's done, and it's like the infiniteness of it all and the magnitude of it all was just like, how can I possibly think that I have got something more than what he has to offer me? And this was what you kept saying about the little tiny ant in this whole universe, and here I was, this ant, just poking at myself and going, yes, I know. And then in doing that, I started to see this broad sense of what God really wants for us. I mean, he's created this whole universe for our pleasure, and all I'm doing is picking out these tiny little things and complaining about this and that and blaming this and blaming that. And it started to give me a sense of why I had no desire. I had no desire because I was so busy poking my finger, as you say, nitpicking, you know.
Yeah.
And it was like I could broaden my attitude towards all the comments that were being coming back to me, my feedback, as not the little tiny thinking bit, but why is this all happening? Why am I so wanting to keep onto this small-minded, imprisoned state that I keep putting myself? And it came more like, oh, God really wants to really give us the happiness that I keep refusing to have. And in that, I could start to go, well, maybe I can do something, you know. Maybe I can get a desire. Yeah,
so, do you have a question?
I wanted to know whether this was just like, I wasn't sure, because after I had these feelings, I was feeling fantastic, and then I walked away and I fell flat on my face. And I thought, am I in cahoots with spirits again, or what was I doing that you know? That...
Well, firstly, it's a personal question, but if you look at what happened, your original assessment is correct in the sense that one of the primary things we've got to do is really question whether we believe in God in the first place, and whether we really do see all that God has done and the benefits of that. And we need to do all of that. But what happens when you make a change, and particularly for you, Laureen, when you make a switch in your attitude or your thinking, you have some quite dark spirits around you always trying to get you back under their thumb.
Yes.
And so what's going to happen is you'll have a shift in thinking, and then all of a sudden, for a period of time, you'll feel quite positive about that shift in thinking, and it might be a quite short period that you feel that way. And then all of a sudden, you'll feel like you're getting hammered by some spirits to get back to the old thinking.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's been happening.
Yeah. If you can keep that mic further away from you. Sorry. The important thing for you now to do is to revisit the thinking that led to your desire improving. Does that make sense to you? Rather than... See, the pattern in your life has been that these spirits who are trying to keep control of you with regard to preventing you from even being happy, you know you've attracted them because your mum in particular is quite oppressive and dark, and you know you've got these dark spirits around you. You know their nationality and everything as well, don't you?
Yes.
So you know that they're pressuring you and trying to cause you to get down on yourself all the time and things like that. Now, you've had this moment of clarity about, it's about my relationship with God, and why wouldn't I want a relationship with God? Bearing in mind that God's got all these things to offer, why wouldn't I want some of those gifts that God's got to offer? So this is very good clarity. Now, though, what's going to happen straight after you have that is there's going to be emotions coming up as to why you're afraid of embracing that, right? And this is what the spirits get into you about, because you're afraid of embracing the true nature of God, because the deep feeling in you is that the true nature of God is much like your mother. Do you understand? That's your deep feeling. So when you start going, now I'm a bit more open to the true nature of God, and I start to feel like I want a relationship with God, now you're going to have also another feeling, which you could say is an error feeling that has been in you for a long time, that if I do this, God's going to get bossy and demanding and push me around and do all the things my mother has done. And those feelings, if you avoid them, can now be influenced by spirits. So what happened in the thing you're describing is you had a positive reflection about God and the true nature about desire for God, and then straight after that you had a fear come up, which you are unwilling to feel. You understand? And this is why you're shaking now even, because you're unwilling to feel these fears. And because you're unwilling to feel them, you can be influenced back into the old state. Make sense to you?
Yes, it does.
Yep. And when you get influenced back into the old state, you get all panicky. And this is why now you feel panicky. And this is why even in your comment you're feeling panicky. You understand?
Yes.
The reason why you're feeling panic is because these spirits want to get you back under control. You're afraid of embracing what you've now realised about God. And also, you're afraid that God's going to be like your mum is. And so, unless you go through those fears and you choose to feel them, you'll want to revert back to, no, I don't believe all that again. And do you see what I'm saying?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. No worries. Okay, any other questions? Louisa?
I just wanted to clarify a bit of terminology.
Yeah.
When you're talking about sincerity, you're also talking about open-heartedness. Is sincerity...
Well, no, I said that sincerity causes your heart to open.
Right.
So you could say sincerity is a driving factor in your heart being open.
Yes.
So your heart being open is a state of being, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
Sincerity is a quality you can develop to obtain a state of being.
Yes.
Right? So sincerity is you could say the quality that you need to develop in order to obtain a state of open-heartedness.
And that's what you're aiming for, aren't you? Open-heartedness.
Well, yeah, because
receive and give.
Yeah, with regard to love and truth, and in particular with regard to God, remember every interaction God's having with you is going to be based on sincerity. So unless you're sincere, the flow of love from God and the flow of truth from God is not going to be possible, right? So the goal is to actually deal with anything within myself that causes me to be insincere. Because if I can release that and become sincere, now my sincerity will open my heart to God. Now, as Wally mentioned, and this is getting back to Sandy's question, the desire for a relationship with God has to be so strong, doesn't it, that it's strong enough to overcome my desire for insincerity. Right? If you think about your desires, remember years and years ago, probably, well, I can remember doing it in 2008, so I'd say that's like, quite 15 years ago, whatever, 16 years ago. I drew a scale on the board. And on this scale I had fear and desire. You remember that? And then we had faith on that scale. Right? And remember, in order for your fear to be overcome, your desire has to be stronger. Now there's two ways for your desire to get stronger than your fear. One way is to reduce your fear. Right? The way you do that is by feeling it and processing it. Similar to what Laurene's doing by, having these sort of discussions with herself and then going into these fear states, starting to process through some fear. So you need to go to get your fear lower. You need to get your desire higher and your fear lower. So how you get your fear lower is by being humble to feeling it. How do you get your desire higher? How do you improve your desire? So let's say we're trying to do both things because we want to reduce our fears to the point where our desires exceed our fears. Because then we'll take action. Then we'll do something positive, right? So we want to reduce our our fear and increase our desire. So the way we reduce our fear is by feeling it. How do we increase our desire? So, Nikki, you want to start?
Develop our faith.
Well, faith drives desire, but how do we increase our faith? Helena?
Experimenting with stuff.
Yes. Well, when you say experimenting, let's be more definitive and specific about it.
Well, for instance, if you don't have the desire to be humble, then you would experiment with trying to be humble a little bit.
And see whether it improves your life.
Yeah.
Yeah. But let's look at it from the perspective of God now. What would we do there? Yeah.
Do a relationship with God.
Yeah, because that was Sandy's original question. Remember what Sandy raised was this issue of if my feelings are such that I don't really want to become sincere yet, what's going to motivate me to become sincere? I've got to have a desire to become sincere, right?
Right.
Well, and I said as a subsequent result of that, I said to her about my relationship with God has to be more important to me than anything else. And so now what I'm asking is, how does my relationship with God become more important to me than anything else?
Is that when you would examine the benefits of having a relationship with God? Is this when you're talking about looking at your life?
Well, that's a very intellectual thing to do, but you could do that, yes. If I'm very bound emotionally and I'm like a constipated emotionally, then some intellectual things would be handy, maybe to break up the constipation a bit. But what would be better? What would be better? Angela?
Experimenting on receiving a response from God.
Yes,
that's
but
pretty easy, pretty basic.
So we've talked. This is again a sort of there's a real. Can you see? There's a real intellectual approach going on, and this is how many of us are, right? we have a tendency to solve problems using our intellect, but very little desire to solve our problem using our emotions. So how would I go about like developing a desire with God to get this desire stronger? What's got to have to happen to my feelings is what I'm asking with regard to God. What my feelings with regard to God are going to have to change. In what way?
You've got to be honest with them, honest about them.
True, but let's say I'm honest and I go, yeah, I don't like God at all. Does that help me much? No. So honesty is a part of it, obviously, but I might not like God at all. See, most of us have grown up to feel quite angry with God, really, probably, because if you think of any of us who've been brought up in a religious faith, we're probably going to go, like, I went to Sunday school Sunday school every week. I was bored out of my brain. Like, why would I want to do that? You know, like you start going, well, God's just a waste of time. Well, why would I want to do that? So that's being honest, but it's not helping my desire, right? So, yep.
Feel it. Explore and feel it.
Feel what, though?
My desire and my faith.
What if I don't have any desire? What do I feel? How do I develop a desire is what I'm asking. Sandy?
I'm just going from the example that we're here right now listening to truth about God. So for me, that's been like number one thing. Like listening to you all these years has helped me to that truth to enter my heart.
Yeah.
And learn a different truth to what I've been taught before.
But yeah, as you correctly say though, you can listen to truth, but it takes years to get it into your heart, doesn't it? So you've got to feel the truth about God, which is different than thinking the truth about God, isn't it? So what truths about God do you have to feel about?
That God is good.
Okay, that's a primary one, isn't it? That God's a good guy, not a bad guy. God's not going to, God's whole desire in life isn't to punish Sandra, it's to help Sandra, that God has your best interest at heart. You're going to have to feel that at some point, aren't you? Because otherwise you're going to be going, why would I want a relationship with God? What's the point of that? I'm going to have to feel, not just think, but feel that a relationship with God is going to be beneficial.
And I feel like that in the process then you have to then, for people that have been raised in religious lies,
yes,
you have to be willing to let go of those lies.
Correct.
Otherwise God's truth about God will never enter your heart.
Correct. So that's the second part of the process. You can say, right, I've got to feel, and then I've got to also be willing to release lies. I've got to be willing to let go of concepts that I totally believe are true, and get to the stage where I can feel the truth from God instead. Yep. Because unless I do that, I'm going to hold on to all these corrupt beliefs about God, which is going to taint my faith, and therefore my fear of God. Religions talk about fear of God, don't they? They say fear of God is good, is what they say, right? So my fear of God is going to be up here. My desire for God, if my fear of God's up there, my desire for God is going to be here, right? Down, lower. And what actions am I going to take that are sincere? Like, they'll all be driven by fear. So none of them will be sincere. Right? So that's not good for me either. I've got to get to the stage where my fear of God goes down, right? And my desire for God goes up. That's the only way I'm going to get to the stage where I want God in my life. And I've got to get to the stage where that's more important to me than anything else as well. So my desire for God's going to be stronger than my fear of Mary, or my fear of my dad and mum, or my fear of people attacking me and abusing me and belittling me and being condescending to me and all that kind of stuff. My desire for God has to be stronger than that. Right? Now, what we're asking is, how does my desire for God get stronger than that? Remember that desire is a feeling, so it's going to have to have I'm going to have some feeling changes about God, aren't I? Yeah, Eloisa?
as you do those things, like as you experiment with feeling, it's also about faith, like remembering the different feelings that you have and the different experiences and the different possibilities.
True, so part of the process is that I go through some feelings and I remember that I've gone through them. It's no good forgetting them. Yeah. Right, so that's important too, yes. I need to remember them. But what feelings will they be is the question I'm asking.
Well, as I say, there's going to be ones that you're going to release at the same time as ones you're going to accept.
Okay, so let's look at my fears about God. What will they be?
It could be all kinds.
The other ones I've got to release.
Yeah, you might be punished.
All right, so I'm worried that God's going to just hammer me.
Yep.
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 Another common one is God's going to control me.
Yep.
Like I give my heart to God and God's going to go, you do this, you do that. I'm not got my own free will anymore.
Yep.
That's another one, a false belief, but it's one that most people believe.
God might reject you or like decimate you.
Yeah, so whenever I do something wrong, God's going to reject me, right? Because I'm a sinner, I'm going to do something wrong. Yeah. So I then think, God's going to reject me whenever I do something wrong, and I don't know if I want a relationship with somebody who I'm trying to have a relationship and then they're rejecting me. Yeah. But God doesn't reject us for doing things wrong, actually, does he? But I'd have to know the truth of that.
That's another feeling you could have. You could ask God about how God actually feels about you, the truth of that, rather than all of your false beliefs.
Correct. So I can actually start to ask God to give me God's feelings about things. That would be helpful, wouldn't it? Yeah. What are God's feelings about these things? Does God, care about me or want to reject me? What does God want? Like, why have a relationship with God if all I feel is that God doesn't want me? There'd be no point to that, would there? No. So those things will help reduce my fears. Now, of course, many of you have other fears, like, what if I have a relationship with God and nobody likes me? So then you could call it secondary fears, where you're worried about what other people think of you. And that interferes with what God thinks of you. So you're then starting to go inside of yourself, well, what's more important to me? Is God's feelings about me more important than other people's feelings about me? I'd have to work through some of that, wouldn't I? Because if I'm afraid of other people and their opinions, nowadays talking about God's not very cool, is it? It's not very generally accepted. So if I've got a relationship with God and I talk about God and I feel a relationship that's sincere with God, not a fake thing, and people get worried about that, and they're worried about my sanity, and they're projecting all these things at me, what do I do then? It's sort of like, well, if my feelings about the people are more important to me than my feelings that God has about me, then of course I'm probably going to give up my relationship with God. Yeah. Ulf?
What if God doesn't exist?
Yeah, that's a very important question we need to answer, isn't it? Like, what's the point of attempting? Well, I don't know about the attempting, because to me it's logical to attempt to see whether God exists, isn't it? Given the fact there's so much intelligence in the world, it would be logical to believe that such intelligence, had a designer. That would be a logical thing to believe. And so therefore it's logical to at least begin the experiment. Yeah. But what happens 10 years down the track and you still haven't felt anything?
Yeah. Second thing is, as I thought of, is what about if I can't get a relationship with God at all, even if I try whatever I can?
Yeah, but even that shows you some errors, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You're not going to get it through trying. Because we talked about that already, haven't we? That's not going to happen that way. Because trying, and really a lot of times when we answer our own questions, we're really seeing our own problems. Because what we start to see is go, I want to try. And I don't want to feel, but I want to try. I'm distancing myself. I want to make it an intellectual thing rather than an emotional thing. So these things can help us. But again, if I've got to reduce my fears about God. So we talked, Eloisa raised some of those fears. That's not exhaustive list though, is it? Like, what about religious beliefs? They can be fears, can't they? It's like, how many people are really worried about hell, burning in hell, if they've been taught that as a child? That they'll be there forever. That's a fear motivation to believe in God, but obviously not a sincere motivation to believe in God. But it is a fear motivation, so that increases your fear. You're going to have to, if you really believe that, you're going to have to deal with that, right? You've got to get to the stage where the fear is lower than desire, but how do you increase the desire? The increasing in desire to know somebody is all about what? Like, if you want to know me, what do? Nina? You don't come to a seminar, right? No, I'm serious.
You seek to understand.
So how do you do that?
Well, you've already mentioned one as you look at the world around you and you see intelligence.
No, Corny's next to you. How do you get to understand him?
I ask questions.
What do you mean you ask questions? So let's be more specific.
About his life, how he feels about certain things.
Okay. So you ask him about his feelings about things?
Yeah.
Yep. So what can you do with God? You can ask the same, can't you? What does God feel about this? What does God feel about that? You can do that, can't you? Yeah. And then what if you can't feel the response of what God feels?
Somewhere in you there's a lack of sincerity. That's
what you've been told, but you don't know that.
Okay. Sorry.
So
lack of response.
Yeah, so let's say I'm asking God for what God feels and I can't feel what God feels. I don't feel like I'm getting an answer.
Well, for me it'd be like, okay, this isn't working, what else can I try?
Why would you give up trying the first thing? Here's what you would do. You'd go, I'm not feeling the answer from God. There's got to be something wrong with my sensitivity to feelings. Because God wants to give me feelings. When I've got a sincere question of God, God wants to give me a sincere response as a feeling, as an answer. He wants to do it. I've got to believe that. But if I do believe that, and I'm not getting an answer, the very first thing I've got to look at is...
I'm not sincere.
No, well, there's that. But what if you are sincere, but you're refusing feelings?
I'm not humble.
Not humble. I'm not humble to feelings. I'm insensitive. Now, you can see for many of us that is a problem because we've grown up we've been browbeaten by our society and by our parents and usually by ourselves to be insensitive. We've tried to tune out of sensitivity because what's a person who's sensitive? Weak and insipid, really. These are all beliefs, of course, all wrong, but we believe that sensitivity, stoic is good, sensitivity bad, right? So if I'm not feeling God's feelings, I feel that I'm sincerely asking for God's feelings and I'm not receiving them, then the very first thing I really need to look at is...
What's first, the insincerity or the lack of feeling?
Well, remember, Sue asked this question earlier and I said they're two separate things.
Yeah.
I said humility can lead to sincerity, right? But they're two separate qualities.
So you need to look at both.
They need to both be developed.
Yeah.
We've talked about that, right? They need to both be developed. You can't independently develop one and hope for the other. They need to both be developed, right? So we want to focus on, okay, I think that I'm sincere and I feel like I'm sincere and I often feel that you will feel when you're sincere frequently, like you'll feel that you really want to know and you really want to understand and you feel quiet. And it's not, when you really want something, you don't go, I just had a 5-minute prayer about it 3 days ago and then I forgot about it, do you? No. It's like when you're really sincere about something.
You burn for it.
Yeah, it's like you're every day feeling, thinking. It's not. You could say it sort of plagues you in a way, doesn't it? That's how it sort of feels. You'll know that feeling is there in you, and then if that feeling is there and you're still not receiving a response, then you'd have to go, well, I must be pretty insensitive to God's responses if I can't feel them.
Yeah, there's something here that I need to feel that's scaring the pants off me, basically.
Possibly,
Yeah.
possibly. Or it could be just that I've become so detuned from my emotions through years and years and years of not having them. You know, I remember when I first started feeling emotions again, I was in my 30s and I started to cry. Now, I hadn't cried since I was about 7 or 6. And it was until I was 33 or something, I never cried. Right? That's a long time to be insensitive. There were things I could cry about. There were plenty of things that went wrong in my life during that period. One of the, you know, I had a marriage breakdown. That was one thing I could have cried about. I had my entire business, one entire business stolen from me, literally, like stolen. I had people steal from my house this all happened in that period. Like I had all sorts of troubles with my wife wanted to run off with another person and leave me during that period as well. I could have cried about all of them, and I didn't cry about any of them. That's how insensitive I was. You understand? And so when I was 33, I remember going to a psychologist once because I was wondering why I was so detuned, right? Because I was stoic, and they said to me, "How would you feel if a certain event happened?" And I said, "I don't know." And he said, "Well, that's the problem. You should know what you would feel." You know what I mean? And I started seeing, before then I didn't think it was a problem, but he said to me, "That's the problem." And I go, "Yeah, probably is a problem. I need to do something about that." And that helped me address the issue of my own lack of sensitivity. Why I had shut it all down. Why I detuned from it all. What went on there? What was the point of all that? And in the process, I opened up and I started crying.
And you were on your way.
Yeah. You haven't stopped crying. It's 30-something years later. I still cry. So that's a good sign. No, I haven't shut it off again. Because I could have gone cry for a bit. Oh, this is all too much. Shut it off. It could have been easily the case, but chose not to. But you can see that I was so insensitive that I couldn't even feel my own feelings, let alone somebody else's, right? Couldn't even feel my own, right? And so I'm going, well, yeah, let's say I'm trying to have a relationship with God and I can't even feel my own feelings. Do you think I'm going to be able to feel God's if I cannot feel my own?
No.
Of course not. So logically, that thing hit me like, oh, I want a relationship with God and yet I can't feel my own feelings. There's got to be something I do about that. Because if I don't do something about that, how am I ever going to feel God's feelings? Yeah.
Inherent within that, though, is the understanding that your relationship with God is an emotional one. It's the exchange of the feelings.
There wasn't even that at that stage, Nina. At that stage, all it was I can't even feel my own feelings.
Yeah.
How can I have a relationship with anyone?
Yeah.
I don't even know what I feel. I can't even guess what I would feel in a certain situation. I can't even put myself in a situation and feel, oh, that's what I would feel. Can't even do that. And it was very, the question was what would happen if some people who came into my house when myself and my sons were there and they started torturing my sons in front of me, what would I do or what would I feel? And I said, I don't really know.
So the key point, though, if I'm hearing you, is you understood that's a problem.
Yes. Well, I was self-reflective enough to understand that was a problem. But of course, before then I wasn't. Yeah. But somebody raising it with me, there's a good thought. Never given that any thought.
So somebody gave you a truth. Somebody
gave me a truth.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the truth can come almost from anywhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
Somebody gave me a truth and I'm going, well, yeah, that's sort of a problem, right? I can see what he's saying. How can I have relationships with people that are any good if I can't feel myself and I don't know my own feelings? And I go, okay, what am I going to do about that? So I went along to this other guy, and and we talked about getting to the stage where you can feel what you feel, see what you see, hear what you hear, know what you know, not be detuned from your own state, And we did some body work. He did some body work as well, and I'd have some like crying responses to the body work. He didn't talk to me much. Just did some body work, and I'd have some responses, and that helped me open up to my feelings. And it wasn't long, a couple of months of that, and it wasn't long, and now I could feel my own feelings by myself. Does that make sense? Now that I could start to feel my own feelings, now when I ask some feelings about God, I can at least have some responses. So it was during that time that I started asking things like, was God a punishing God? And it was during that time that I realised that God, even though my entire religious upbringing in this life had been that God is one, it was during that time that I worked out that God wasn't one, wasn't punishing. But it was only because I had opened up to my feelings first.
It must have been a game changer.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah,
it was. Along with a lot of other things that happened during the same time. Yeah. So it took somebody saying something to me and me being able to go, oh, yeah, that's actually right. And then me wanting to do something about it. Before I took any action. And then, it was great because before then I didn't really sort of see things like I can remember, like I've said to you before, I think, driving down a highway and then all of a sudden realising that I could actually recognise and feel colour. That I hadn't ever been able to do that my whole life. I saw colour, but couldn't feel colour. And it was just a major change over my life, just how I could now feel things that I didn't feel before. And they were all there already. I just never felt them. Because I detuned from it when I was 6 or 7 and shut it all down. So now that I'm capable of feeling, getting back to Sandra's question, I'm wanting to I can now feel when I'm afraid. Right, so one of the things I felt during that time was that before then was that God was going to, I felt by leaving my religious faith, that meant that I would be eternally condemned. And I felt that as a fear, and I had to work through that fear in order to come to the conclusion that God wasn't like that. Does that make sense? I had to work through it as a fear. Once I worked through it as a fear, I came out of that. Nearly a year later, I came out of that feeling that, no, actually, I'm not condemned. I haven't been condemned by God. I've been condemned by the religious faith, but they're wrong. Because God hasn't condemned me. God just wants me to grow. He wants me to become more loving. He doesn't condemn me. He wants me to improve, but he doesn't condemn me forever. Right? So that was a major shift in my attitude to God. Now there's a major shift in my attitude to God. My desire for a relationship with God can improve.
You're going to want it.
I'm going to want it now, because before I was just afraid of it. Now I want it. So now I'm developing this attitude where I want to have a relationship with God. And what was very helpful during that time is hardly anybody else wanted a relationship with me at all in my whole life. So I didn't have many other relationships to distract me from wanting the relationship with God either. Now, I'm not suggesting you have to do that, but that's just what happened. Now, in that process, my desire for God began growing because I was starting to get to feel and therefore get to know God. I was asking questions of God and over time getting responses that I could feel and therefore respond to. Right? So initially I was asking the question, has God condemned me for the rest of my life? It took me a year to feel that that wasn't true. But in that year I had to release a lot of fear and I had to release a lot of false beliefs that I had. And in the process of doing that, I could then feel what the truth was about that.
So each time you release a false belief, there's that sense of newness and more positive. There's a shift that somehow life is better because of it, and then
Always, yes, always.
And that is the impetus to also to continue, because you've had an experiment that's been positive.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's proven to be true in its effectiveness. Correct. Yep. So now in the process, my desire for God is growing, and my fear of God is going down. At some point there's going to be a crossover where you go beyond 50-50 and your fear is now less than your desire, right? And when you get to that point, now your desire begins to drive you further. It becomes a passion. And now that's going to be a passion that drives you for good. Like, not just for good in terms of righteous good, but for good in terms of eternally good. It's going to drive you for the rest of your existence. If the fear is greater than your desire for God, then of course that isn't going to happen. Right? And that changing time can only occur through an emotional process, not an intellectual one. Right? So you can think all the good things that you can think, but unless they're feelings, they're not going to have a lot of effect on you. Yep. And I would not have changed without that process occurring. I would never have remembered who I was without that process occurring. It took 7 years after I began that process before I remembered who I was, because I didn't have enough desire to know.
Understandable.
Or understand. And I didn't, and I had huge fears. I had lots and lots of different fears of people and opinions and all sorts of problems that I had. And when I went through the memories of knowing, or when they first come in, they started coming to me in dribs and drabs right from my childhood, but I didn't put two and two together, right? Once I started putting two and two together, it was like full-on emotion for like months and months and months of time, right? That went on for nearly 5 years. But again, because I'd learnt how to be sensitive, I could handle it. I could deal with it. Could go through it. Oh.
How can you distinguish an answer from God against your own bias or spirit influence?
Well, firstly, most of the answers that come from God are going to be completely opposite of your own bias. So, in other words, you're going to want to not accept them rather than accept them. So a lot of people sort of believe that when they start asking God things, then God will give them a whole heap of lovely feelings, and God will give them a whole heap of feelings that are sort of like magical, and of course that's what happens with spirits, but it doesn't happen with God. What happens with God is the very first things he wants you to address are all the things that are bad about yourself. And they're all the things you don't want to hear. You understand? And so what happens is you start hearing a whole heap of things that are confronting, that you don't want to hear, that you don't want to accept. And that's a good sign, because that means that you're starting to face up to some truths that you haven't wanted to face up to before. So a lot of people sort of believe they can just fool themselves into God telling them nice things about themselves, or God telling them things about themselves. But if you think about your preferences, they're not to hear bad things about yourself, are they? The majority of people have grown up from their first moments on earth just wanting to feel good things about themselves generally. So what I've found is that God doesn't arbitrate what feelings God gives you about your condition. In other words, he doesn't say, that Jesus character, he's pretty like, he can't handle things. So what I'm going to do is tell him a whole heap of nice things first. Yeah? Which is what the average person on earth does, right? They go, you think about your average conversation with your partner, you've got an issue to raise. What do you do first? It's not like the average person who's having a compromised relationship just raises a whole heap of nice things first and tries to butter them up a bit and make it all palatable first and everything's good first, and then they drop the bombshell, which is not dropped like a bomb, it's dropped like a little twig. Just even though inside the person emotionally it's like a bomb, but they sort of drop it like a twig. And there's just this little thing, this little tiny thing that needs to be addressed is the average attitude, right? Yeah, God doesn't work that way. God's interested in you making the largest possible changes as soon as you can. Your largest possible changes are going to be the things you find the hardest. So you're probably going to get them first. Yeah. Nikki?
Just reflecting what you're saying in my experience, that's all very true.
Yeah.
But what, like, you mentioned last week how you can long and you are sincere with God at the start because you're not aware of all the other stuff going on that you've got to deal with.
Correct.
And God can give you something there.
Yes, because you are sincere and you're not aware.
Because you're sincere but you're not aware.
You're sort of ignorant and you're sincere.
Yes.
In the moment.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in that sense, God can give you a bit or something.
Mm-hmm. And then you start becoming aware.
Yeah, and then that's where it gets really hard.
Well, not really.
The resistance to
it just requires more humility.
Right, yeah. Yeah.
Doesn't it?
Yeah. So it's like the big thing, it's like you can work on some other emotions, but you still don't feel happy inside because of the big thing that you've not dealt with.
Yeah.
It's like dealing with loneliness versus dealing with like another sin, with like the big sin, like with women or women have with men or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like you can work on those things, but you still don't feel this feeling like, wow, I've gone over some massive challenge I've had internally.
Yeah, but now you're reducing all of the comments I've just made into a self-help program.
Right.
And what did I say from the beginning?
It's about God.
It's about God, yeah. So one of our biggest problems is we try to reduce everything back to a self-help program rather than continuing to make it about our relationship with God. And so what we have a tendency to do then, Nikki, is we go, I've got to work on this thing because of my relationship with women, I've got to work on that. No, you've got to work on those things because of your relationship with God. It's damaged because of not having those things or having addictions that interfere with your relationship with God. If my relationship with God is my priority, will I worry about how much I've got to cry? I'm not going to care, am I?
No.
If I need to cry today, then I cry. If I need to cry for 2 hours today, I have a cry for 2 hours today. That's how it is. If I need to go through some fear for a week, right, and my bowel doesn't work for a week because of it, and I lose hair in the week and everything else, well, I go through that. That's what I need to do, to go through the feeling. If that's what I have to do, then that's what I need to do. I'm humble to the fact of what's going on. If I get sick because I, have resisted something, then I've got to deal with that too. There's plenty of times in my past where I've gotten sick because I have resisted some feelings. I need to learn the lesson not to resist. And so once I get sick a few times, I go, yeah, that was because I resisted again. So I shouldn't do that, And you learn the lessons as you go, but it's all with the focus of your relationship with God, not just because you want to be, friendly with some women or, you want to have a good relationship with your partner or because good relationship with partner and friendship with women and friendship with men and all these other things, they will all come if you're more loving. If you're more loving and you've got the relationship with God and you're slowly working towards God, then all these other things will be added to you. So you don't have to focus on all those other things. You just need to focus your attention on a relationship with God, and the other things will be sorted out in the process. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. So don't keep reverting to making it about your self-improvement. It's about how close you can be with God. The closer you are with God, the happier you're going to be. You'll also be more knowledgeable. You'll also understand more truth. You'll also be more enjoyable to be with because you'll be more sincere. There's a lot of side benefits, but all of them are side benefits in comparison to relationship with God, because that will be the primary benefit. So unless my focus is relationship with God, now all these side things, if I focus on my relationship with God, all these side things need to be addressed. Now, there's going to be side things that come up that look like mountains sometimes, because they'll be big, they'll be big emotional injuries that are preventing you from having a close relationship with God. And you'll go through them because you want the relationship with God. And you know that it's going to improve your life and you know things are going to get better. That's why you'll go through them. But if you decide, I want to go through them because I want to not be lonely, or I want to go through them because I want to have a partner in my life, or whatever, then once you get what you want, then you're probably going to stop. And God's offering you eternal progress, and it would be a shame for you to stop it for whatever reason. He's offering you, bliss in terms of happiness, but increasing internal progress that's infinite in its nature, because God himself is infinite. That's what he's offering you. It'd be a shame to go, I'm content with this relationship. That's like somebody going into the spirit world and then progressing to the second sphere and going, this is a lot better than Earth, I'm happy now. And so they stop. And they don't keep looking and progressing and desiring. And they might stay in that state. And I've seen people in the second sphere stay there for thousands of years. There are some people in the second sphere who I lived with in the first century who are still in the second sphere. And what a shame. Because they could be much, much happier. But this is the thing, when we lack desire for God, we get content with certain states. And if you think about it on Earth, many of you get to the stage where, this is as good as it gets. And that's it, I'm happy now. And that's a terrible shame to get to that state, actually, because it's not as good as it gets. It can always be better because God is infinite, and the happiness and joy and love that comes from God is infinite as well. And it's only going to require your desire to receive it.
So, could I ask then, when you've received some of God's love, is there always this feeling in you there's more I could get, or there's more happiness that could be there for me?
Yeah. You think about many of the people who've written the Paget messages, and you read what they say, they always say that. We always know and are striving for more because we know there's more available, and we know from experience that the more we receive, the happier we get. And we don't even know sometimes how that's even possible given how happy we already are. Do you know what I mean? And then you receive more, and then all of a sudden you're happier again. It's sort of like, what? But that's what happens. It's like you don't know how infinite God's nature is, and therefore how much is possible, until you start experiencing more and more. Now, obviously, the more and more you experience, the easier it becomes to trust that there's more. Okay? But right at the beginning, it's quite difficult to trust there's more, isn't it? And that's our problem when we're right at the beginning. We're going, I don't even know if God exists, let alone, and I don't even know if I believe God exists, let alone can actually feel God or feel that I'm receiving love from God. So, it takes time particularly during that initial phases, to develop that faith and trust based on experience. The more of God's love you receive, the more faith you're going to have in it. That's a fact, isn't it? It's just like the more you know how to drive a car, the more comfortable you are driving a car. So it's the same kind of principle, really. The more you experience something, the more confident you are in experiencing it in the future. And that's how it is with our relationship with God. The hardest part is getting started. And this is what we're really talking about the last couple of weeks, is getting started is dependent upon sincerity. And after sincerity, being humble to everything that happens as a result of what you feel. Yeah. In other words, becoming more sensitive. So God's trying to open up your soul so you can have a strong desire for truth, a strong desire for love, and a deep amount of sincerity, and a deep amount of being able to feel sensitivity, a deep amount of sensitivity. And the more sensitive you become, and the more sincere you become, and the more love you will feel, and it becomes like a rolling snowball, and like just increasing and increasing, and you gain a lot more confidence in it, and a lot more faith in it as a result. Yeah. So, getting back to Sandra again, because that was the question, wasn't it? The desire issue is a big issue, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Because if I can reach a point where I desire God more than I'm afraid of God, and more than I'm afraid of everybody else, right? And I can desire God more, then my progress is assured if I'm sincere. And all of those states are feeling states. They're not thought states. So they're not thinking about it. They're feeling about it. And as Nina raised, if I'm not feeling about it, then the issue is nothing other than my own insensitivity to feelings. Right? Because God is not insensitive to your feelings, and God has her own feelings for you. So if I can't feel that, then it's my insensitivity to feelings that need to be addressed. And you can see that's like a mire as well, isn't it? Like a mud pit as well, because at the end of the day, there's many, many reasons why I might be so insensitive by the time I've gotten to, say, 50 or 60 or 70 years of age, or even by the time I got to be a teenager even. There's many reasons why I might now be insensitive. I've seen little 3-year-olds get to the state where they're now pretty insensitive, you know? So it can happen pretty quick, where insensitivity grows in us for lots of different reasons. And as an adult, when we're desiring God's love, we're going to need to address it. We're going to need to deal with our insensitivity. You want to get to the stage where your emotions are like a finely tuned race car, you know, like where that any tiny slight adjustment and you can feel it, you know, you can feel the change in you as a result of it. And then you want to get to the stage where they're so sensitive that you can even feel it in everybody else as well. Yeah. That requires a development of your humility. Helen.
What comes to me is that it also reflects the love you have for people when you're so sensitive to the injuries or the difficulties that they're having, but you still give them love and...
Yeah. And you still feel for them, like you're not insensitive to how difficult it is for them either, you know, like you get to the stage where you don't ever belittle yourself or anybody else for what's in them. Yeah? But you are firm when you know the truth about something. You don't waver because you can feel what the truth is. And like when I compare that state to like I said, when I was in my early 30s, I feel like back then I was like an automaton, really, in a lot of ways. Unable to really feel much of what's going on around me, unable to feel myself, unable to feel God, really. A lot of my things I was doing was totally based upon what I intellectually believed to be true, rather than what I felt to be true emotionally, because I just didn't have many feelings emotionally. Yeah.
And you're just actually demonstrating that love and truth are, joined at the hip, isn't it? So
Yeah.
that's what happens when you get to that state.
That's right.
Yeah.
And you can see sincerity is an aspect of truth, isn't it? Yeah. So you can see why it's so important, given the fact that the Holy Spirit is the Spirit of truth, responding to the sincerity in your heart, and the Holy Spirit being the conduit through which love flows to you from God. Then obviously you can see that God is pretty hot on you being truthful and sincere. Yeah. And what I'm getting at in this, like last week sort of discussion, is that if we want to have a relationship with God, we're going to have to learn that if I'm not receiving love, it is fundamentally because I'm insincere, or if I believe I'm sincere, I'm not humble. Right? So, and either one of those two things are a problem for my future progress. Yeah. Well, good luck with that.
Thank you. Thank
you. Experiment emotionally. Yeah. And also be honest about your true feelings about God and His existence and how you perceive God to be in your own self, Be honest about it to yourself. It's so important to be reflective about those matters. True prayer is not going to come out of your soul until you're reflective about some of those issues, Many of us sort of believe or think we believe in God, but emotionally it's actually quite difficult to have a belief in God sometimes emotionally for people, There's a lot of things that have interfered with our feelings about God and our ability to feel God's feelings about us in the course of our life. And that's why it's so difficult to get a start. Yeah.